Do we have? Hey, welcome back to the show. We have our good buddy Paul Stone is with us. He's the co-founder and CEO of Colonial Metals Group, who's an advertiser on this show. They're a Florida-based precious metal supplier that helps clients develop secure retirement plans by investing in gold and silver. Paul is also writing a Substack called thepaulstone.substack.com, and I wanted to bring him on to get his opinion on. So we were just talking with Professor Richard Wolff about the Fed printing money and this kind of scam that is happening between the Fed and the government. And the question was put to Jared Bernstein, who's that chief economic advisor to President Biden. Hey, if we print our own money, why do we have to borrow it? And it stumped him. And so now here is the president of El Salvador. And listen to what again, I think he's letting the cat out of the bag. Listen to what he has to say about this very topic.
So who's financing the government? Government is financed by treasury bonds, paper. And who buys the treasury bonds? Mostly the Fed. And how does the Fed buy them? By printing money. But what backing does the Fed have for that money being printed? The treasury bonds themselves. So basically, you finance the government by printing money out of thin air. Someone could ask, well, so if the government can print unlimited amounts of money out of thin air, why did they collect taxes? I mean, in theory, it would make sense, right? If they can print unlimited amounts of money, why would they need taxes for? The answer is simple, but it's very shocking. The real problem is that you pay high taxes only to uphold the illusion that you are funding the government, which you are not. It's shocking, but it's true. The government is funded by money printing. Paper backed with paper. A bubble that will inevitably burst. The situation is even worse than it seems, because if most Americans and the rest of the world were to become aware of this farce, confidence in your currency would be lost, the dollar would fall, and the Western civilization with it.
Wow.
Ukulele's right.
So, Paul, what is your response to seeing the president of El Salvador say that, what he just said?
I love how the outsiders know more than the insiders. You know, I love how just obvious it is to everyone outside of the United States of America what we're doing to finance our system on a daily basis. And it's sad how, you know, the general media at large isn't willing to really poke a stick in the eye of this falsehood and have folks truly come to comprehend just how precarious this shell game is.
So what I think Professor Wolff just told me was that, so when the government wants to spend money, like they want to spend money on the Ukraine war, so they don't go out and they don't raise taxes to pay for that. So what they do is they go out and they borrow money in the form of people buying treasury bonds. But then he told me that then the Fed prints the money to buy those treasury bonds. Well, why does the Fed have to buy those treasury bonds if they already got the money for them? Go ahead. Do you understand that?
Quick analysis. The outside world only holds $8 trillion of our 34 trillion in debt. The rest of it is held in house, and it's money that's just printed out of thin air. So when the government says we need to create $1 trillion to pay our bills, they hook up with the Federal Reserve, and the Federal Reserve issues the funds over, and then that's considered a debt. So there's printing money out of thin air, or in today's modern world, issuing it onto an Excel spreadsheet, and poof, it exists. And then there's also the treasury market, where debt is sold as an investment option. So So the rest of the world holds 8 trillion, and we hold 26 trillion inside the borders to ourselves, which is just another measurement of the enormity of how much fake money needs to be created out of thin air, to which there is no investor to buy.
You could see why that guy in El Salvador is, he needs some good security detail. Put it that way.
Yeah. A lot of black vans parked outside his house.
Yeah. Yeah. So you wrote this, so Paul, you wrote this Substack, and it's all about MMT, and you say MMT is not the answer. Well, I'm going to show people what Stephanie Kelton, who Professor Wolf just talked about, was the economic advisor to Bernie Sanders. She's going to explain to us what MMT is, and then I'm going to get your reaction. Here, let's watch this.
One of a handful of economists who contributed to the body of academic scholarship known as MMT, or modern monetary theory. MMT provides an accurate description of how a fiat currency, like the US dollar or the British pound, actually works. It reminds us that we're no longer on a gold standard, so finding the money to pay for the things we need is never an issue for countries like the US or the UK.
So she's saying basically what
I'm allowed to laugh, right?
It's Wile E. Coyote magic. She doesn't look down, and just stop, don't look down, and we could make this thing not even a foundation of sand.
So she's saying basically,
oh, it's the movie Don't Look Up. It's the more current movie Don't Look Up.
Yeah. So that's just a precursor. Now I'm gonna play, this is about 3 minutes long. Here she's gonna explain how it actually works in reality, and let's listen to it.
In theory.
Finding the votes to pass a spending bill can be hard, but finding the money is never a problem. They just create it. So here's how it works. Whenever Congress and the president agree to spend more, the government's bank, the Federal Reserve, works with the rest of the financial system to get that money into our accounts. Everything's done electronically, so there's no physical printing of money involved. If you got a $1,400 check from the federal government earlier this year, or if your company received money to help cover payroll and other expenses, then you received some of the newly minted digital dollars that were created to support our economy. No taxpayers were involved in that process. It was all done using nothing more than a computer keyboard. So why are we hearing so much about the need to raise taxes to pay for infrastructure and make other investments in our economy? In a word, deficits. We've all been conditioned to worry about deficits. So lawmakers are looking for ways to spend more without adding to the deficit. And that's what this whole pay-for game is about. Unfortunately, deficits have gotten a bad rap. They're almost always seen in a negative light. And I would like to change that. When we hear the word deficit, we probably think of a deficiency or shortfall. Okay, a deficit always sounds ominous. So when we hear that the federal government just ran a $3 trillion budget deficit, it can sound worrying. And it can even anger people. But there's another way to think about government deficits. Just as a 6 becomes a 9 when we view it from a different angle, a government deficit becomes a financial surplus when we look at it from another perspective. A deficit hawk might look at this picture and see nothing but a sea of worrying red ink. That's not how I look at it. Here's what I see. I see what's happening on the other side of the government's ledger. When the government spends more than it taxes away from us, it makes a financial contribution to some other part of the economy. Their red ink is our black ink. When you look at it this way, it becomes clear that every deficit is good for someone. The question is, for whom? And what are those deficits being used to accomplish? It matters how the money is spent and who ends up with the resulting surplus. Tax cuts that deliver huge windfalls for those at the top without sparking investment and opportunity for the rest of the population don't make good use of deficits. On the other hand, spending trillions to support the economy during the pandemic put the deficit to good use. We just had the shortest recession in US history. To me, that was fiscally responsible. Being responsible shouldn't mean running the government's finances like a household. Instead of trying to keep the deficit in check, Congress should be focused on keeping inflation in check. That's the real limit on spending. And it's the thing to watch out for if you're thinking about spending trillions on things like infrastructure, healthcare, and free college. Instead of asking, how will we pay for it? Congress should be asking, how will we resource it? To answer that question, think of people, factories, equipment, and raw materials like wood and iron. If we're going to build high-speed rail, fix crumbling infrastructure, and green our economy, then we'll need concrete, steel, and lumber. We'll need construction workers, architects, and engineers. We'll need companies that can fill thousands of orders for solar panels, EV charging stations, and electric school buses. If our economy has the productive capacity to quickly supply all of those things, then we can easily resource it. Or take healthcare or free college. Paying the bills to expand Medicare to include dental, vision, and hearing is easy. The challenge is making sure we have enough dentists, optometrists, and audiologists to treat everyone who needs care. And if you want to resource free college, then you need the faculty, the classrooms, and the dormitories to teach and house more students. In a full employment economy, all of the resources you need are, well, fully employed. There's no spare capacity anywhere in the system. So if the government suddenly tried to make all of these investments at once, it would quickly discover that it doesn't have the people or the building materials to do the work. To get the resources it needs, it would have to compete with the private sector, bidding up wages and prices. That would be inflationary, and it would be fiscally irresponsible. We are a long way from full employment. We have the resources we need to begin repairing our broken systems, but we have to believe it's possible. We can't let words like debt and deficits hold us back. With a better understanding of public money, where it comes from, and how it works, we can take aim at the many real deficits that are bearing down on us. In every crisis lies an opportunity. We can pick up the pieces and try to reassemble the fragile systems that were in place before the pandemic, or we can build anew, shaping our bountiful resources into the kind of world we want to live in, one that cares for our people
Great reset.
and our planet. I truly hope we choose to be bold. Thank you.
Oh,
So, okay, so she touched on the problem there, Paul, didn't she? She touched on, well, here's what you say.
Not sure what side she's
because the
on.
problem is when you print money and spend it, that it creates inflation. And inflation's bad for everybody. And now we have banks that are falling, we're going to talk about in a second, that are failing again. Because of inflation. Here's what you said. By pushing in your Substack, you said, by pushing for unchecked government spending as long as resources are available, MMT could lead to wasteful public sector expenditures, okay, stifle private sector innovation and competitiveness, and let's not overlook the potential moral hazard, encouraging governments to rack up debt with the assumption it can always be printed away, burdening future generations with higher taxes and lower quality of life, and of course, inflation, which is exactly what happened when they pumped $5 trillion into the economy with the CARES Act. Those $5 trillion, by the way, when the government spent it, didn't go to the things that people really want it to go to. It went to the pockets of a couple of thousand millionaires and billionaires. So
what's the downside?
So, Paul, what is your response to her explaining that we should just print money and that deficits aren't bad?
Well, first of all, she's very well spoken, and I appreciate that she believes in what she believes. It's just that it's another theory. So on the face of it, it's just an idea. And she's asking us to be bold at the end, and she's not offering any proof of how anything would actually work right. Now, for all of us who actually live in the real world out here in the economy, when she says we can't run the government like we would run a household, that's insane. Because how is the government different than a household? It has to deal with reality. So when we talk about having to balance our checkbooks, right? If we don't have the money, we can take on some debt, credit card debt, and then we got to look at how much extra that dinner costs when you tack on 15% interest because we bought it on a credit card, right? So we have to look at those things because we don't have unlimited resources. When the government considers suddenly that it does have unlimited resources, then it destroys the system that's actually here and built by the people. Because now it's like this giant aircraft carrier that's just rushing through our town and breaking everything up. It's this massive beast that we can't check, and it isn't willing to check itself. And that's where waste comes in. And that's not even the biggest threat. But when you have to balance your checkbook, you'll have to say no to some things. Well, we can't take that 5-star trip, but we can take that 3.5-star trip and get a canoe and have a nice time out at the lake cabin, right? The government just wants 5-star everything. There's nothing checking the efficacy of their ideas tested into reality before they actually pull the trigger. Because it's like my father's old saying, the government never has enough money to do it right, but they always have enough to do it over. And that's at the heart of government. That's why I harp on the fact that they've never really solved any problems. They just create them. But one quick example, if I could give you one example. Let's say all the farmers around the world decided to grow 1 trillion ears of corn. They said, forget soy, forget this, forget that, we're all growing corn. So they grow corn. Every ear of that corn would have the exact same nutritional value as a country away or a state away. They would all have the same value. But when you issue money out of thin air, it destroys the value of the money already in the system. So the last point is, how ludicrous is it to think inflation has just arrived recently when a home is $20,000 in 1971 and $440,000 today? That's inflation. That's inflation. Commodity prices in general are 1,800% since the creation of the Federal Reserve 110 years ago. That's inflation. Why are we acting like it just arrived?
So that's what we're living in now. So it's amazing how, I mean, I've had Stephanie Kelton on the show, and I'm not an economist by any stretch of the imagination, but I just had on Professor Wolf, who's a self-described Marxist, and he says that the problem is the deficit. He says that right now the interest that we're paying on the deficit is as big as our military budget.
Right.
So
wait, Jimmy,
it's just the interest.
You got to look at it from two. Sure, that's one way of looking at it, Jimmy. Wile E. Coyote is falling off the cliff, but I like to look at it as Wile E. Coyote flying to the moon.
Yeah. If you just turn the earth upside down, that's what he's doing.
If you just invert everything, it becomes a good thing.
I mean, she is right in a sense that they don't raise taxes to pay for shit.
Well, right. So here's where I think the world learned that lesson.
Go ahead.
1991, George H.W. kicked Saddam's ass in the Middle East. His approval rating is 94% going into re-election. A little recession kicks off, but he had promised he wouldn't raise taxes. Read my lips. And what did he do? He raised taxes. Cost him re-election, perhaps. And the whole world just recognized after that, because that's one hell of a seat of power to have. Just print the money next time. Yes. Don't raise the taxes.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point.
So, there's $34 trillion in debt right now.
Yes.
Debt. And
just in the federal debt. That doesn't count what states owe. That doesn't count the M2 supply, the debt the Federal Reserve has created out of thin air, which is around 22 trillion. It doesn't count a lot of stuff. It's just one huge bill.
I've heard people say that the United States is never going to pay off that debt.
Can we bundle it?
And so
could it?
And so what historically happens when a country gets into a position where it can't pay off its debt, it starts a war. And I just fear, because the bankers run everything, and there's a saying, every war is a banker's war. And
you can work it off with a nice war.
And so it looks like they're trying to start wars all over the place. They're trying to start a war with Russia, a nuclear power. They're trying to start a war with China. They're trying to start a war with Iran in the Middle East. I just hope that this debt, to me, that's the another big problem, is that historically countries start wars when they have debts they can't pay off.
You mean blood sacrifice?
Let me make one more point here about modern monetary theory. So first of all, it's modern, which means they just came up with it recently because they're just stymied by the fact that they have to keep creating money out of thin air. So now they're going to legitimize it by saying it's modern monetary theory. And theory isn't proof. It's just an idea that's just to be tested. The idea is, for all the folks watching, it's the government's belief that money is a commodity, that the government can create as much of it as it wants in perpetuity, which is forever. And that dollar will never be, quote unquote, worthless or taken out to the woodshed, shot in the head, and replaced by another currency. That's where I talk about the ears of corn. Create 4 trillion ears of corn around the world. Every ear will have the same nutritional value as another one. But when you create money out of thin air, it destroys the value of the money. So you can't have these arguments without noticing that the government, that the dollar today is sunk to a value of only worth 2.7 cents.
Jesus.
So as you print, you kill. So modern monetary theory would assume that we can print money until the dollar's worth a hundredth of a penny, and a Starbucks is $80, and your $100,000 a year salary is $600,000 a year, and just everything just keeps going up and up and up and up and up. But what they miss is 40% of this country doesn't earn enough money to have to pay taxes, which means where it's good and shiny and wealthy, it isn't in most of the land. Most of the land is struggling. And to me, that's evil.
What if it identifies as valuable?
So here is Alan Greenspan, the former chairman of the Fed. Everybody knows this guy. And so here's what he said on Meet the Press about America's debt and why we don't ever have to worry about our debt. Here's what he said.
The United States can pay any debt it has because we can always print money to do that. So there is zero probability of default.
So then I would say, and I'm sure the host didn't, I would say back to him, then why don't they just go print $34 trillion and pay off our goddamn debt? Why don't they do that? Because that would create a disaster. That would devalue the dollar to nothing. We would have hyperinflation.
Yes. And
that's the end. That's how you end your country.
Ruin the magic spell.
Right. That ruins the magic spell. So he's kind of being a charlatan. He's using chicanery, right? When he makes that.
Talking to me like a 5-year-old.
Right.
And I do know nothing. So, that's good. You could just go forever. Phew, thanks, guy that looks like Rupert Murdoch, except he doesn't have the accent.
So it's like, so we can just print it and pay it off. We just haven't gotten around to it yet. So go ahead.
When a company takes on debt, it's also a revenue generating machine, right? So it has some mechanism to its operations that brings money in-house. Right. And a company would rarely ever owe more than it brings in, for the year. Right. The government has no revenue generation element to it. It is simply just sucking stuff out of the economy and then redistributing it back to the economy as it chooses. It doesn't generate it doesn't have the ability to generate money to pay down its debt. And because of its decisions, it has to continue to print more. So the debt continues to rise. Inflation continues to rise. So they have to print more, and on it goes. But now they're in this position where they have to raise rates, which stymies economic growth internally, organically. So as the economy dies further and further and further of living off of its own revenue generation, its own steam, it takes on an artificial lifeline from the federal printing press. And eventually you don't have an economy anymore. You have zombie institutions and zombie companies and just pretty much a zombie economy that is living in a falsehood because it doesn't live within the means of its own reality. Yeah, the government is subsidizing that falsehood by what it creates out of thin air. But eventually you do end up with what's proven throughout history, hyperinflation, the death of institutions, and the inability to earn enough money to pay for the cost of living whatsoever. And then the working part of the economy just stops. That's what people really have to wake up to, is that you have the option to bet on someone's new theory or bet on what history has already proven. And then really start thinking for yourselves. It's why I love your show. That's why I love you, Jimmy. You inspire and educate folks to think for themselves. And these types of discussions like here on the TED Talk should really be alarming people who understand reality is the only thing you can bank on. It's the only thing you can trust. And when the government loses, you lose.
And if people are wondering, are noticing your background, it's because after this show he's taping an audition to play Patton in the remake. And
when you put your hands in a puddle of goo, they used to be your best friend's face.
Paul's not only a chairman of Colonial
You've
Metals.
caught me on a traveling circuit.
He's
so.
also a thespian.
Is
so.
he selling me a reverse mortgage? What is this background?
Okay. All right. So over to Steph.
Okay. Thank you, Jimmy. All right. Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. Let's go here. Could someone make an animation so we can follow all this? E.g. Imagine, thank you. RFK Jr. stood up for workers and helped a shit ton of workers in
Yes, he
lawsuits.
did.
Seaweed, thank you for the reminder.
Yes, he did.
Marxism aside, the FTC's recent ruling on the non-competes is huge. I am a young biz development manager, and NCs have been brutal to me. Lazy, pearly clutching boomers have to go work and earn their customers now. James, avoid wordy people and bills. If we had a maximum wage, like Jesse Ventura said, it'd fix itself. No more than $1 billion a year or a $5 million. Communism, too loaded a word. And now the WEF talking UBI. Thank you, Hempcar. I don't mean the socialism of Soviet Russia or any other oppressive regime claiming to be socialist, rather a genuine socialism, which not only distributes the wealth but maintains liberty. H. Zinn, is that Howard Zinn's Hempcar? In a peculiar part of the country, Dick Wolf, on how the rubes are ignorant for not knowing about Marxism, does he mean New York City and California, where the flu is treated with superstition and face diapers? Seaweed!
I would, when
Face brawl, I would call
he
it.
said parts of the country, it's like, no, the whole country. The whole country, nobody knows what the fuck Marxism means.
Nobody here knows what a woman is, let
we
alone
can't,
Marxism.
we can't even figure out what a woman.
How about a Marxist woman?
Do you understand?
That's
We
hard.
don't know nothing.
That's hard. Are you ready, Jim?
Yeah, come
All right,
back.
back to Jimmy.
I'm here with Paul Stone and Kurt Mexican. And so remember we talked about this. So interest rates went high, right? Because they put $5 trillion at least with the CARES Act for COVID. And when they shut everybody's business down. And so now interest rates are up, just as predicted. And so now banks are failing because of that. And so the Fed was like, well, we're gonna lower the interest rate. Don't worry, we're gonna lower the interest rate. They said they were gonna have 3 interest rate lowerings this year. Well, that was a big lie, because this is from, what day is this from? This is from May 2nd. If Americans want lower interest rates, they're going to have to do it themselves, says analysts. So the Fed said they're not lowering. So here, the Federal Reserve indicated it is unlikely to lower rates just yet, which means anyone who carries a balance on their credit card won't get a break on sky-high interest charges. Rather than wait for a rate cut, consumers should take matters in their own hands.
New credit card.
And go. That's
Already on it.
That's what they say. That is literally the advice.
No.
Yeah,
The
let me tell you
advice-
something I learned a long time ago on a $5,000 nothing credit card debt that I couldn't pay down back in 20 years ago. Okay?
Uh-huh.
And then I left school. I started doing comedy. Didn't make any money at it. I just didn't pay it. They
Yeah.
just ducked it. And you know what happened after, I don't know, maybe 7 to 10 years?
What, just went away?
They just sent me more credit cards
Yeah.
with a lower limit.
Yeah.
You know what the penalty was?
What?
But now this is not a big amount of money, right?
Right.
And then I think I paid it for pennies on the dollar to the recovery
To the credit, yeah.
because I was hip to that by then.
Yeah.
But the thing that blew me away was, so I could have responsibly paid the money I spent on this of $5,000, and I didn't. And what was my penalty? Here's 2 more cards. You didn't even apply for them. We just sent them to you because we heard you were a piece of shit, and that makes you an ideal candidate to have more credit cards.
So once you default on a credit card, they're willing to give you another one right away, because you can't default twice within 7 years, and they can hound you forever for that. So in the wake of the recent rate hike cycle, the average credit card rate rose from 16.34% in March of 2022 to almost 21% today. That's a near all-time high. Currently, the interest rates on personal loans are closer to 12%.
Shit, is the mob still around? Can I hit them up for better rates?
So this is their advice. Those anticipating a dip in the new credit cards APRs in the near future should probably adjust their expectations.
Oh, am I having expectation inflation? Is that the problem? We need to lower my expectation rates.
Total credit card balances Total credit card balances have been above $1 trillion since August of 2023. Now they're around 1.05 trillion since this past February. So let me bring in Paul. So Paul, now you explained before about what they're doing, because inflation is hot. So when prices are increasing, they raise interest rates. And why do they raise interest rates? So that will cool down the economy, meaning people will lose their jobs. They try to get people to get laid off to cool inflation. This is
cooler.
This sounds like
a casino.
This sounds like an evil form of economics, but that's what they're doing.
Sounds like mind control is what it sounds like to me.
And now they're not. They're just telling. So now they're not going to lower the interest rates. And what do you make of that, Paul?
Well, if they want to lower interest rates, it's generally because we're in a crisis. So the only reason you lower rates in a major way, it's like being stuck in the mud. You just floor the gas pedal. You just floor it, and hopefully you can get out from being stuck. So when you look back, and anyone can Google, write in, give us a call. We'll send you a link to look at a very simple Federal Reserve chart from the Federal Reserve's website that just shows normalcy is an interest rate around 5 or 6%. So now we're just complaining that money isn't free. Because money was free during the Obama administration, rates were at 0 for 8 years, and we got used to that, and banks got used to that, and the whole world got used to that. And now we have inflation that is in a way bothering the Federal Reserve. We've been dealing with inflation at about maybe 8% a year since the 70s. 8% a year. So if your wages aren't going up 8% a year, you're slowly drowning. So when they cut rates, it's to flood the world with money, like flooding your engine with gas and trying to get your wheels to get your car from being unstuck. And then you immediately, historically, would start raising rates higher again, back to a normal place, like 5, 6%. When rates are going up, yes, you're trying to cool an overheating economy historically, but here you're just trying to cool a money printed economy, but you can't stop the money printing. So if you print, you continue to affect higher inflation. So you can't lower rates because then inflation gets out of the bag. And once that's out of the bag, it's wreaking havoc everywhere. And that's a fire that's very difficult to put out. So they're not going to be raising rates because they can't quit printing.
They're not going to be lowering rates.
Lowering rates, yes.
Sorry. Because they can't keep printing money. And here's let me show you. Here's one of the effects of that. Here's one of the effects of high interest rates. Fulton Financial acquires Republic First Bank after first U.S. bank failure of 2024.
Is it bank failure season already?
It's bank failure season again.
It's like the first day of baseball.
After struggling under the weight of higher interest rates, Republic First Bank Corp on Friday found another regional lender willing to rescue it. Fellow Pennsylvania-based bank Fulton Financial Corporation. The announcement represents the latest crack and the latest bandage job in the beleaguered regional banking industry. However, Republic First was relatively tiny compared to other banks that have failed or teetered on failure since the start of last year. Higher interest rates in the industry have cut into the value of some banks' bonds, including those at Republic First. While the ailing market for commercial real estate, especially in the office sector, has hurt others, raising concerns that depositors might flee those financial institutions. The rescue of Republic First follows last year's series of failures by much larger regional banks, including Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. The struggling First Republic Bank was acquired by J.P. Morgan Chase & Company last year. This year, New York Community Bank Corp has encountered similar problems, with the lender struggling with its exposure to the ailing commercial real estate market and maneuvering to stay afloat following a steep stock sell-off. So another bank failure that was acquired by the FDIC. We got another bank acquiring it to come in and rescue it. That's what they call it. So what do you make of the bank failures? And should we expect to see? Now, you wrote a Substack a month or two ago about how this seemed eerily similar to what was happening around 2007, 2008. Is this another sign of that, Paul?
It is to me. One of the great things, I care a great deal about people. I especially care a great deal about folks that have, you know, they're not creating a savings anymore, adding to it anymore. They're living off of it. So when we talk about this issue in particular, we're talking about the location of one's savings, and people need to look at news like this and think this through and consider, how do I alleviate being in harm's way? How do I move my money free and clear of these headlines until you, Mr. Jones and Mrs. Smith, wake up in the morning so excited to trust once again the great economic power of the United States of America because you feel that they've got your back? What I wrote about a few months ago was the hiding of the news, hiding of the what to me should be public information, because we are literally talking about someone in their 60s, 70s, and 80s who've worked their whole life, saved their money, and that money might be sitting somewhere where they don't feel it's safe. And shouldn't we be told the truth rather than have all this loan business going on behind the scenes? Because it's our money that's at risk. We can't print money, the government can. So yes, it's eerily similar, but to 2007, it's just, to me, Jimmy, the government we have to stop thinking that the government's actually aware of everything that's going on. Because to me, if you actually look closer, they're very unaware and they're just very reactionary. And in 2007, they weren't aware of just how bad the situation had gotten. They are aware of it this time. And so they're just printing like hell. In 2007, they weren't. So you had, you know, some articles put out there that talked about bank insolvency all over the place. And we're talking, you know, a new term was invented. SIVB, the systemically important financial institution, sci-fi.
It's called
so
sci-fi.
Suddenly you had components to our financial world that couldn't disappear.
So
somebody knows what's going on. How do you come up with that?
So let's remember that what puts these banks in a position to default. So they've invested money in bonds, right? And low interest bonds, correct? And then
long ago, during the Obama administration.
Long ago. And so now that interest rates are going higher and they're overexposed in the commercial real estate, they end up losing. They don't have the revenue that they did. They're not getting the money in from the interest on the bonds to cover the interest rates out. Right.
Lending generally slows down when interest rates go up.
Yes.
Because its money's more expensive to borrow. Literally, it's 500% more expensive to borrow right now than it was, 8 years ago?
Okay.
If interest rates are at 5% and they used to be at 1%, that's a 500% increase in how much it costs you to borrow $100,000.
So you're saying, and what you said before was you expect the bank failures to keep happening. It's funny how they
expect history to repeat itself, especially when we're dealing with mathematical probabilities or mathematical track records.
Okay.
As simple as that.
And,
I mean, yeah, of course.
And so,
obviously, it's going to do that.
And so eventually they're going to have to print even more money.
Right.
Yes.
They've already been printing to save this. You know,
when you watch that TED Talk, it's good for you.
Yeah, I mean,
or you
I
really got it wrong.
Yeah.
They're doing prosperity gospel.
Let me mention something too.
This
might sound a little, conspiratorial, but I was at a Christmas party. This would have been 2018. There was someone at that Christmas party who had a unique position in the world. He was at a very important government agency, and he was talking with his roommate who raised money for this very important government agency. And he said the number one thing that his team is focused on is how 25% of Americans will be unemployed 7 years from then.
Mm-hmm. That's not conspiratorial.
Robotics, AI. So when we talk about AI and how it'll write your term paper so much better than you ever could, when we think about the economy, a consumer spending driven economy, how much money does a robot spend at the grocery store?
Zero.
Well, here's the great news.
So if we unemploy our country, then the economy just goes into the shitter. Sorry to curse.
But you're a resource. You didn't hear what the woman said? Think of it like how whales are basically big bags of oil to harvest. You're a big bag of data. And we use our resources, it's going to be fine.
Goodness.
They're open. By the way, that thing that you're saying, that doesn't sound conspiratorial. Sounds like every WEF talk and every Great Reset thing I've heard
WWF
for the last
talk.
goddamn 3 or 4 years. UBI. Friends of mine, remember my buddy Aaron, the lobbyist, wanted to talk about UBI. And I go, you know, it's a scam, right? UBI, the offer. What's all the AI talk? They wanted us all. First of all, they got scammed too on AI because them stores where you walk into, like the Whole Foods where you loot the store digitally and the AI rings it up and it's cool. Turns out they didn't have that working. It's a bunch of Indians looking on.
That's right.
Like if you open up the computer, it was like a hamster wheel and there wasn't any of this amazing technology.
That's right.
So now they're all fucked because they all banked on the computers going to do all these idiots' work that, and by the way, they've been working on you at your end, turning you into an AI. It's not just from the top down. From both ends,
you'll finally behave.
Meet in the middle. And it's not working out. And the thing that you said that really sticks in my mind about you got to remain true to the rules of the reality you invented, that's their little magic spell is falling apart because now cognitive dissonance is kicking in. Because I would have never even cared about this stuff how many years ago? Because I'd have to think about it. But now everybody has to because they fucked it up so bad.
So when I go to a Clippers game, there's a store inside the stadium where you put your credit card in, and then the door swings open, and you walk in, and you pick up whatever you want, and you just walk out.
Right, an Indian did that.
So I thought it was some kind of magic.
Yeah,
some AI magic. So we didn't cover this. We should cover this. It turns out that it's not AI magic. They just have cameras on you, and there's a low-paid person in India watching what you do and trying to calculate what you're buying.
No.
Yes, that's what I just said. That's what it's been.
Yes.
I thought technology was at least better than that. So basically, the original Star Trek, they had two low-paid immigrants pulling the automatic doors open on the set, and that's literally what we have in 2024. They were prophets.
Okay. Well, Paul, thank you for coming on. I hope you're enjoying your vacation in Florida. And
traveling, but working every day. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Worker. And anyway, Paul Stone from Colonial Metals, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it, buddy. We'll talk to you again soon.
Later.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here.
Thank you. Jimmy, we're going to go to Rumble shortly, so stand by. Are you ready to do that, girl? Or what do you need to do?
Yeah, I don't have anything
emotionally, you feel all right with it? Okay, let me do a quick refreshy.
Okay.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go to Rumble. Thank you, Paul.
See you, Paul.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
for having me.
Yeah, that was great. Okay, so look, let me make sure I've got it. All right, I refreshed, ladies. We're going to go over to Rumble right now. We'll be right back. Adios.
If I were Rabbi Shmuley and diddle 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 digga digga diddle diddle dum, All day long I diddle little bums. If I were a schmooly man, I'd peddle all my dildos. Dreidel dildos, selling dildos with my daughter and her mum. If I were a Jewish schmooly man, I'd be digging with a dildo in my bum. I'd wear a grotesque nose and go grab some goyim right on the nipple with a pinch. A Shabbos lap dance brace for the youngest mensch.
Hey, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there for more AM Joy and the rest of MSNBC. And click on any of the videos right here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. And you can get more videos from MSNBC for free every day with our newsletter. Just visit